Hello, everyone, and welcome to Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is part two of our 2025 Halloween special. In case you missed part one, which I implore you to go back and listen to part one, where we went over found footage films in horror. I decided that we were going to discuss four different subgenres in horror this month, the month of October, which is pretty much Halloween month. I know Halloween is at the very last day of October, but it just something about October just is all horror. You know, you have certain movie stations on television that do marathons all through the month. You know, it's just something about it. You know, people decorate their house, at least they do down here, decorate their house with Halloween stuff. It's a whole thing, and it lasts the entire month. And so I said, you know what, we're gonna dive in to horror, one of my favorite genres of film. I just love horror, and this episode, part two of our special, we're gonna go all the way back, all the way back to, I guess some may say, where it all started, and that is the Universal classic monster movies, where they covered Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, the Phantom of the Opera is even one of them. You know, the Wolfman, and the creature from the Black Lagoon. You know, all of those classic horror films that you probably weren't old enough to watch when they all came out. I seriously doubt it. But if you were old enough, hey, welcome to the show, youngsters. But if you were like me, you probably caught them on reruns. You caught them on what is that? TCM. You know, Turner Classic Movies or something like that. You saw these old films, you know, and black and white, and saw the remakes of these movies and kind of piqued your interest. Whereas you went back and watched the originals, and it's just something about these movies that have stood the test of time, that make these films still cultural icons, something that is magical about those films that people are still trying to capture today. Filmmakers and studios, they're still trying to get lightning in a bottle by remaking or retelling, or, you know, giving their spin on these classic monsters. And we're going to go over the history of the Universal classic monsters. And of course, since this is movie goodness, we have a review at the end of this film. No, we're not going to review any of the classic films from back in the day, because I have a film that covers all of these classic, well, most of them. And it's a film that I finally remember watching when I was a young type, and that is none other than the 1987 film, The Monster Squad. Yeah, we're going to, which, if you ever seen The Monster Squad, don't really fit the tone of these movies, but you have Dracula in that film. You have the creature from the Black Lagoon, Wolfman. You have Frankenstein's monster in that movie. It covered most of the Universal monsters, even though that film was not released under Universal Pictures. That film was released on TriStar, I believe. And so it's weird in that sense, but these characters are public domain, so any studio can make a Dracula movie, or a Frankenstein film. And this kind of fits because this week Guillermo del Toro has a Frankenstein movie coming out on Netflix, even though this week is being released in theaters and it won't come out on Netflix until next week, I believe. But either way it goes, I'm excited to see this version of Frankenstein. If anybody can step up and remake this classic monster movie, it has to be Guillermo del Toro, man. He was born for this. I'm excited for it, even though I've heard some reviews of critics who said it's not great, but that's fine. That's fine. I'm still gonna watch it. Still going to dive in like it's gonna be the greatest thing on earth. Hopefully, I don't set my expectations too high. But let's begin by going over the history of the Universal classic monsters. And now this little subgenre, if you will, it consists of different horror characters or creatures that originated from novels. These weren't original creatures created for film. These were based off of novels or some different form of media from way back then when film and television wasn't even thought of. So you had to get all of your entertainment through books and novels and newspapers and stuff of that nature. And some of those characters were, just as I covered, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, the Phantom of the Opera, Count Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the mummy, and the Invisible Man. Now, the only originals that were made exclusively, well, shouldn't say exclusively, but made just for the film aspect of it all, was the Wolfman. That was not based on any literature. This was made just for film. And also the creature from the Black Lagoon. Those two characters were created just for the films. And so the rest came straight out of a different piece of media. The original series began in 1913 with the release of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And that original series ended in 1956 with The Creature Walks Among Us. While the early installments were initially created as standalone films based on novels, their financial and critical success resulted in various crossovers released between these monsters, as well as other properties such as Albert and Costello, the famed comedic duo who made films back around that time. They had a crossover, well, a few of them actually, along with others. I think even the Three Stooges had some crossovers with these monsters as well. But that's due to the popularity of them all. Diving a little further into the history of these films, Universal early horror films were adapted of works of familiar authors and texts to give the films a prestigious appeal. That's like today slapping a director's name on a title or above the title, or things of that nature, or even the star of the film if he's popular, if he's a movie star like a Tom Cruise or something like that. That just draws people to the films a little bit more. So these included the 1931 Dracula, whose success led to the production of other works such as Frankenstein, which came out that same year. Frankenstein's ending was changed by the studio head at the time, who wanted Universal to be able to develop key characters into spin-offs. At least that's what we call them today. To spin off other characters from that production. Following the release of the other Universal films, such as The Mummy, which came out in 1932, The Invisible Man, that came out the following year in 1933, and The Bride of Frankenstein in 1935, there was a dry spell of horror films. Universal only returned to the style following the successful re-release of Dracula and Frankenstein. The renewed interest in horror films led to new works, starting with Son of Frankenstein in 1939. Universal would only introduce a few new monsters in the 1940s, which the most famous being the totally original Wolfman. And the Wolfman that came out in 1941. The decade of Universal's horror output includes many remakes and sequels, with films often directly reusing old sets, even footage and narratives to replicate moments from their earlier horror productions. Now, before we had an MCU, before we had a DCU, when they had all of these crossover films and whatnot, back in the 1940s and 50s, Universal's had the bright idea to have a cinematic universe. And so they began doing these cross films such as Frankenstein meets the Wolfman in 1943, House of Frankenstein in 1944, House of Dracula in 1945, and Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein in 1948. In these films, the monsters from the studio's earlier films teamed up against a variety of characters. Now, it was suggested that Universal classic monster films exist as a loose mashup, which allowed Dracula to exist but be watched separately from Frankenstein, but also allowing the characters to systematically be brought together and developed in other films and media. These productions made were often crossovers and sequels, such as Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, the House of Frankenstein, the House of Dracula, and so on and so forth. These meetings started with Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein and ended with Abbott and Costello meet the Mummy in 1955. The idea from Universal was that their films contained a world that were potentially all monsters may drill. That this is a world where this is a thing. That Dracula and the Mummy and the Wolfman and Frankenstein's monster, all of them were here. They were. It's the norm. And so the sole new monster films that Universal produced in the 1950s, that was The Creature from the Black Lagoon in 1954 and The Mummy in 1959. The latter as a co-production with the British Hammer Film Production. If you know anything about the Hammer films, a lot of great horror films came out of that studio as well. Now, towards the 1960s, the Universal monsters grew beyond film and became more widespread. Initially, this began in 1957 when Universal struck a 10-year television deal with Screen Gems to distribute 52 of their own titles. These television screenings and films being included on Male Just Male's matinee movie from 1958 to 1979, which was a very popular television show. I wasn't around. Actually, it stopped the year I was born, so I never got to see it. But someone who did get to see it was Stephen Sommers. And he became a director in Hollywood, and he directed a film that we may know, and that was the remake to The Mummy. What year that was? 1999, I think that movie came out, and he stated that he was introduced to those films through that program, Mel's marquee movie. He used to watch that program, so if it wasn't for that, he never would have been inspired to make that remake. To some's delight, and some people not so much. But that's neither here nor there. Universal became part of MCA in 1962. MCA is the Music Corporation of America. They merged in 1962. By 1964, Universal Studios tours would eventually include appearances from Frankenstein's monster. Several products based on the characters from Universal film series was released, ranging from plastic model kits Halloween masks, figures, plush dolls, toys, drinking glasses, coloring books, postal stamps. They started pushing them out like crazy back in the 60s. While some of these objects barely resembled the actors who portrayed them on film and television, others were more generic interpretations. Um, Other mediums featuring the Universal monsters in tandem was the 1962 smash hit, the Monster Mash, which still to this day is played on the radio around Halloween. I still hear that song. And it is based off of the Universal monster films. And you had the TV show The Monsters that came out in 1964, which was based on the likeness of the Universal monster characters. In 1990, Universal was part of a merger between Panasonic and several other corporations. Between 1991 and 1994, Universal released VHS, yes, VHS people, home video editions of their horror films. This was the first time these films were packaged together as the classic monster line, accompanied with a newly designed logo. Prior to its home video series, the Universal films were featured multiple monsters were called super shockers or monster rallies. I don't know the basis behind those names, but I guess if I grew up in that era, I probably would understand it more. In the 1990s, we also saw a trend in the merchandising of Universal Monster material as part of a trend of a decade of recycling and reinventing old material from the past. This led to the release of the aforementioned Stephen Sommers' The Mummy in 1999 and a monster rally style film, Van Helsing, in 2004, also directed by Stephen Sommers. I like The Mummy. Didn't too much care for Van Helsing. Van Helsing came in close to being reviewed today because it too also featured all of the classic monsters, and it is a Universal film, but I just could not bring myself to do it. I couldn't do it. And that's not to say that Monster Squad is any better of a film, but it's just something I'll never get that opportunity to review that movie. So I chose that one. But merchandising of the characters in formats such as clothing and board games have continued into the 21st century. The franchise has featured a dark universe portion of Universal Orlando theme park and the Universal Epic Universe, which opened just a couple of months ago on May the 22nd, 2025. Beginning, I've been to Universal Studios a couple of times, and I unfortunately I haven't been there around Halloween time because I always wanted to go to horror nights, but I never got around to doing it. One of these Octobers, I'm going to make my way to the Universal Studios, man. I gotta partake in all of that goodness. So back in October of 2013, Universal they had hired two screenwriters, Roberto Orce, who tragically passed away just a few months ago, and Alex Kirchman. They're known for making some or writing some pretty decent. I think they did a couple of the Transformers. I know they wrote the first one, which is the best one. They're also a part of some other franchises as well, but Universal hired them to develop and relaunch the Universal monster movies and bring these characters to the big screen in a shared universe. Because around this time, this is when the MCU was kicking off, and the cinematic universe had kind of been reborn. I'm not going to say start because, as I mentioned before, these same characters are the ones who started it off with a shared universe. But they wanted to recapture that, but in a modern way and kind of rival the MCU. And so they wanted to make a franchise of films centered around Universal classic monsters. And so by July of 2014, the studio officially hired Chris Morgan to replace Orci and work alongside Alex Kurtzman to oversee development of the interconnection series of films based upon the rebooted versions of these characters. The duo was tasked with creating the overall outline, if you will, of these monsters. The development of the cinematic universe continued as Kirschman and Morgan began uh, uh, additional photography for the 2014 film Dracula Untold. Now, initially, that film, when they started off, it was going to be its own film. And once these decisions were made, they before the release of that film, they went back and did some reshoots to try to include it in what they were, what they were putting together in this shared universe. So the reshoots position in the final film of that movie is in modern day. Everything was going to take place in the past in that movie originally. I Dracula Untold. To be honest with you, I only watched it once, and that's when it came out. I didn't dig it, but it's certain moments in that movie that stick with me, and so I have to go back and rewatch that movie to have an honest opinion of it. But what I remember of it, it wasn't all that good. So it really wasn't a good start to this quote unquote shared universe. And so that should have been the writing on the wall. But I never looked at it as a shared universe because they didn't really announce it until a couple of years later that it was going to be a shared universe here. I always looked at Dracula Untold as his own little movie, but that's neither here nor there. But to be honest with you, they kind of pushed it to the side. It was because the movie didn't do good box office wise or critic wise, reception wise. It didn't really click, and they kind of like it was his own thing. But if we ever introduce Dracula, we'll bring back oh my God, what's his name? Oh, I can't remember his name. But he played a good Dracula, but the movie wasn't good, unfortunately. And so they had to kind of abandon things or reassess things. And in 2017, they came out with The Mummy, another version of The Mummy, and that was the official start of this shared universe. They planted a flag in The Mummy. This was it. We're kicking off this cinematic universe, blah blah blah. And so in May of 2017, the slate of these upcoming films was released with the logo. They had the website. They had a score. They had everything laid out. I, I remember it, and I was super excited. They even had the stars of those films linked, locked down. And we're talking the creme de la creme here. We're talking movie stars. We're not talking unknown actors or up and coming actors. We're talking Academy Award winning, big blockbuster starring actors. I think Angelina Jolie has signed on to be the bride of Frankenstein. I think Javier Bardem was Frankenstein, or Frankenstein monster. Johnny Depp was the Invisible Man. Who was Wolfman? Oh man, is on the tip of my tongue. I cannot. Oh, I want to say Ryan Gosling. I know Ryan Gosling was linked to it in this last adaptation of it, but he had backed out at the last minute. But I don't know if he was at the initial release of this release. I can't remember. But anywho's, and Russell Crowe was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the Mummy was played by Sophia Bartella, but Tom Cruise has signed on to star in that film. And so, all right, now you're like, okay, they're serious with Tom Cruise is going to do The Mummy, a horror film. Never saw Tom Cruise in a horror film. Well, when you went to go see the movie, he still hasn't been in a horror film. It was an action movie, and it was not good at all. Uh, Following the poor reception in the, it was a flop. You know, just a underwhelming box office performance of The Mummy in 2017. Universal canceled pre-production that had began on The Bride of Frankenstein. That was the next movie that was going to come out of this franchise, and postponed all plans for the Dark Universe slate of films. Now, I I would say they overreacted. I understand the movie was bad. The movie was not, and I think it was all Tom Cruise. Initially, it was a horror movie, but when they signed Tom Cruise to it, Tom Cruise brought his Tom Cruise-ness and brought his own writers and changed the whole plot. And it was gonna, now it's more action oriented, and that's what initially derailed that film. But yeah, it and unfortunately derailed the entire slate of Dark Universe films. It stinks. It really does stink. But hey, maybe it was for the best. But I would have loved to have seen Angelina Jolie as the Bride of Frankenstein. That would have been great. I think she would have killed it. No pun intended. But hey, it's the one that got away. And now let's run down the list of all Universal classic monster films from the beginning till now. And you let me know in the comment section or email the show that which one of these were your favorite. And did you know that these films were Universal monster movies? There's a couple of them in here that I didn't realize was a Universal monster movie. I just thought it was a horror film. I didn't know it was linked to the Universal classic monsters, but that's neither here nor there. We go all the way back to 1913 with the first Universal classic monster movie, and that was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In 1923, you had The Hunchback of Notre Dame. In 1925, The Phantom of the Opera. In 1931, Dracula. And also in 1931, Frankenstein. In 1932, The Mummy. 1933, The Invisible Man. In 1935, The Bride of Frankenstein. Also in 1935, Werewolf in London. In 1936, Dracula's Daughter. In 1939, The Son of Frankenstein. In 1940, The Invisible Man Returns. And also in 1940, The Mummy's Hand. In the same year, The Invisible Woman. In 1941, The Wolfman. In 1942, The Ghost of Frankenstein. Also in 42, Invisible Agent, The Mummy's Tomb. In 1943, Frankenstein meets The Wolfman, Phantom of the Opera, Son of Dracula. In 1944, The Invisible Man's Revenge, The Mummy's Ghost, House of Frankenstein, The Mummy's Curse. In 1945, House of Dracula. In 1946, She-Wolf of London. In 1948, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. In 1951, Abbott and Costello meets The Invisible Man. In 1953, Abbott and Costello rounded it all, going for the hat trick, meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In 1954, Creature from the Black Lagoon. In 1955, Return of the Creature. Also in 1955, Abbott and Costello meet The Mummy. And in 1956, The Creature Walks Among Us. Now, that was the first run of these Universal monster movies until 1979, when we got the remakes and the spin-offs, when they tried to revitalize revitalize this franchise. And in 1979, a real good year, um, you had Dracula. I believe that's the one with Franklin Jella, if I'm not mistaken. And in 1999, you had The Mummy. The Mummy Returns in 2001. The Scorpion King. That's the one that I was shocked because I didn't put two and two together and realize that the Scorpion King was a part of the classic or the Universal Classic Monster series because it is. It's a spinoff of The Mummy Returns. And so by default, it is a Universal Classic monster movie. Congratulations to The Rock for that achievement. In 2004, Van Helsing. In 2008, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. And look, man, I really, it's something about that movie that I actually liked. I don't know what it is. It's not as good as the first Mummy. It's not as good as the second one, but it's just, it's something about that movie I really liked, even though I fully acknowledge that it is the worst of all three of them, including the Scorpion King, if you want to put four. And so I don't know what it is, but I'm just drawn to that movie. In 2010, you had The Wolfman. Now, this is another one that's kind of diversive, at least in my eyes, because I love The Wolfman. This is the one that stars Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins. Joe Johnson directed this movie. I love The Wolfman, but I hear people just spit pure vitriol on this movie, and it's like, wow, really? I don't know what it is. What were y'all looking for? I actually love that movie, but that ended that little run. And so we fast forward to 2014. This is when we get the quote unquote modern era of these films, and it started off with Dracula Untold in 2014. Then you got The Mummy in 2017, The Invisible Man in 2020, Renfield in 2023, and Wolfman just a few months ago in January of this year. The Invisible Man is probably the best out of that era, out of this little crop of films. I love The Invisible Man because it wasn't your typical Invisible Man movie. You know, it had a different narrative, but it fit. And it fit within the horror genre as well. I thought it was well done. This came out right before the pandemic. I mean, what, a couple of weeks before the pandemic actually struck and everything was locked down. And I remember this was one of the last movies I saw in the theater before we were held hostage in our homes for the the entire 2020. But I loved The Invisible Man. Renfield is another one of these movies that I didn't really put two and two together that it was a part of this film franchise. But technically it is because Dracula, this with Nicolas Cage as Dracula. I like that. It was a cute little movie. Plus it was shot down here in New Orleans. I remember when they made this movie down here. But I thought it was cute. You know, it wasn't Nicholas Hoult was the star of the movie. I thought it was good. And Wolfman, once again, I got to go back and watch it again. I haven't seen it since it came out in January, but I enjoyed it. I did. I thought it was really good. Now, is it as good as The Invisible Man? And the reason I draw comparisons to that because both films were directed by Lee Whannell. No, it wasn't as good as The Invisible Man, but it was entertaining, you know, because once again, it was the Wolfman, but it was told in a different way, you know, and I actually liked the story that they were telling. But that's just me. So far, and that's the end of it. Of course, that was a few months ago. There's nothing else really in the chamber as far as Universal monster movies. There's been a lot of movies in development. that's kind of stuck in limbo as far as getting off the shelf or getting produced or whatever at this time. Nothing is really cemented like they're gonna make it. They were gonna make a Dark Army movie in 2019. Nothing has come of that. I think Paul Feig was going to direct that movie, which tells me it was going to be somewhat comedic. There was the Frankenstein movie, like I said before, in 2017 with Javier Bardem playing Frankenstein's monster, which was, oh my God, I couldn't. And I think James Wan was producing that movie. Oh, man, we missed out. In 2019, we were going to get The Invisible Woman. I think Elizabeth Banks has signed on to direct and star in that movie, but nothing has come of that. 2020, you was going to get a musical, Monster Mash. Nothing has came from that. In 2021, we were going to get another Dracula movie. Chloe Zhao was hired to write and direct this film, but it was going to be a futuristic science fiction Western film centered around Dracula. I'm glad that kind of that went to the back shelf. They had a Little Monsters movie in the work. They had the Invisible Man movie that was back in 2020. It was going to be the sequel to the Invisible Man, but Lee can't get his name out. Winnell decided to move on to the Wolfman movie, and after the reception of Wolfman, I don't think he's returning. And there was going to be a reboot of The Scorpion King a few years ago. That didn't get off the ground. Van Helsing movie, another one. That didn't get off the ground. A Creature from the Black Lagoon. I don't know what happened with that. I don't know why. That's like untapped potential there, but nope. For some strange reason, that's never come around. A lot of directors for years have been attached to this movie, but nothing has transpired. John Landis, John Carpenter, Peter Jackson, Guillermo del Toro was attached to it, but he left it, and I think that's what brought about The Shape of Water, which won him an Academy Award. So, just imagine if you would have did The Creature from the Black Lagoon. But yeah, that's basically it. It's dormant for right now. Is in hibernation. This classic monster movie franchise, but you know, as you can see, it isn't dead. It never dies. You can't keep it down for long. And so we'll see as the days go on, as the years go by, will we get another stab at the Universal monster movies. So without further ado, let's get to our review today, and it is the 1987 horror comedy film directed by Frank Dekker, The Monster Squad. This film marks the first screenplay written by Shane Black. Shane Black, who went on to write. He also is a director, but he first started off as a writer. He wrote the Lethal Weapon films, The Last Boy Scout, The Lone Kiss Goodnight, and one of my most underrated favorite movies of all time, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, Iron Man 3, and God forbid he did The Predator, which is the worst Predator movie ever made. But he has so many good films under his resume, and it all started with The Monster Squad. And this is 8-9-year-old Kevin watching this movie, and before I really got into the Universal monsters, before I knew what they were all about, this was my introduction into that world. And that's what made me, start watching those movies. And I quickly found out that those movies have a very different tone than this film. This is pure 80s. Pure 80s. There is nothing more dated than the Monster Squad. I rewatched this movie last night in anticipation for this recording, and because I haven't seen this movie in years, but I knew right off the bat this was the movie I wanted to talk about for this show, and I rewatched it in about 20 minutes in. No, I'm lying. 10 minutes in, I sat there and was like, I think I made a mistake. I think I made a mistake for a film that was so treasured around that time. Because I remember watching this movie and going to school, and uh, uh, we would talk about it in class. And this was probably the most quotable movie for, I would say, for a 2-year run. Everybody quoted the Monster Squad at my school, at my elementary school. We knew this movie backwards and forwards because it came on. I'm gonna assume HBO. It came on HBO all the time, and so that's all we could watch. And it was the only horror film that you can get away with watching. At least you could in my house because it was PG. You know, it wasn't R, it wasn't gory, it wasn't bloody. It didn't have well, it had cursing, but it wasn't overly offensive. And so you can get away with that as a kid watching the Monster Squad. So it came on all the time and we watched it. Or I watched it and my classmates watched it all the time. But the premise of the Monster Squad, the film the film features the Universal monsters led by Count Dracula. They are confronted by a group of salvy children out to keep them from controlling the world. And that's the premise of the movie. This was the filmmakers or the studio trying to capitalize on the Goonie craze. The Goonies that came out a couple of years prior to this. I can't remember what year the Goonies came out, but it had came out. Everybody loved the Goonies, a group of kids, you know. I think this was before Stand By Me and all that. But around the 80s, it was always, at least 80s films, it was kids getting into adult situations and trying to find a way out of it. And this was one of them. And they tried to do it in this horror film. I love the premise. I still love the premise of this movie. Another film that if they decide to remake the Monster Squad, it would fit today if they do it right. But they'll have to stay true with the kids portion of it because it wouldn't work any other way. But this movie was so bad. It was so bad. It is so offensive now. I got offended by a lot of the dialogue in this movie that, of course, in 1987, you didn't. You know, in 1987, it was common dialogue that was spoken. You know, calling people the F word as an insult. Can't say that now. You can't do that now. You know, calling the kid the dude's nickname is Fat Kid. That's his nickname. Fat Kid. You can't go around calling a little kid Fat Kid for the entire movie. And I still don't know his name. I think it's Horace. Yeah, his name is Horace, which is even worse. But they called him Fat Kid the entire movie. That was his name. And bruh, the style of clothes, the way kids were with their parents, you know, going out. It's stuff that don't happen today. And I can see somebody who was born in the 90s or the 2000s that are youngsters, watch this movie and think this is a science fiction film because there's no way you can, there's no way people live like this, but this is how we live. Kids will have to, it was a such thing as meeting up with your friends, you know, actually going outside and breathing real air Yeah, this happened in the 80s and the 90s, believe it or not. But it's it was just weird to watch this movie uh 40 almost 40 years later and just have a complete turnaround. I mean, this was my favorite movie when I was a kid. I loved the Monster Squad. You know, I can still quote it. I was sitting there mouthing out the lines while I was watching the movie. It was like, oh my God, I remember this. Why do I remember this? why why did I enjoy this movie so much? Uh the acting in this movie is 80s acting. It is not fair to critique this movie in 2025 eyes because this is a 1987 movie through and through. This is how movies were, I should say, around this time. This is how they acted. And these kids, these were all unknown kids. These kids, I don't even think they appeared in anything else. I don't recognize not one face or name from this movie. Kids wise, now the adults I've seen in other things, you know, Mary Ellen Trainor, she was in everything in the 80s. Everything. She played the mom. She was the matter of fact, she was the mom in the Goonies. They used the same mom, the same actress to play the mom from them Goonies in this book. It's like, my God, they tried to be the Goonies so bad. But they had all the classic monsters in this movie. You had Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, werewolf, or Wolfman, I should say, the creature from the Black Lagoon, the mummy, which they were just there. But the best one was the Wolfman, and what's the Jonathan Grise, who plays the Wolfman, and I think he played the Wolfman in another movie too. I want to say Fright Night 2, but I could be wrong. I probably should have looked it up before I said it, but I do recall him playing the Wolfman in another movie. If you don't know who Jonathan Grise is, he is Uncle Rico in Napoleon Dynamite. Yeah, he was the Wolfman in this movie. But yeah, they had all that. The plot was silly, dumb. I mean, so dumb and ridiculous that if you wrote this screenplay in 2025 and sent it to a studio, they would have shredded it. They wouldn't even sent it back to the writer. They would have shredded it right there and probably sent back the shreds to the to the. Yeah. I mean, the plot was so bad. It was so silly the way they stumbled upon certain things so easily, got the MacGuffin of the movie, the the mysteries weren't a mystery. You know, they tried to give a little Hardy Boys edge to it, and it couldn't. It was just so convenient and dumb. It was just dumb. Some of the plot points, they're still unanswered to this day. It's just bad. It was just so bad. But it was there to make you laugh. It was there to entertain, and it was there to pay homage to these classic monsters, and that's what it did. You know, it was funny. I still chuckled at a couple of lines throughout the film. But the crazy part, for almost 40 years, there was a line in this movie that I remembered when I first watched it back in 1987, and I remember laughing so hard. I remember that was the line that we always quoted at school, because to a 8-9-year-old kid, there was nothing funnier than this line. And I watched it last night, and I didn't crack a smile. I've been laughing at it forever, you know, since the last time I watched it. I can't remember the last time I watched it, but every time I think about it, I kind of chuckle internally, you know. And so to witness it, maybe it's because I knew it was coming, but when I witnessed it watching it, I was like, this is stupid. This is the dumbest. The delivery didn't even work. Nothing about it was funny, but it made me laugh, and it really, to go deep and philosophical with y'all for a minute, it really put things in perspective how an adult thinks and how a child thinks. Because as a child, there was nothing funnier than this line. And I'm going to say the line. I know y'all are on the edge of your seats what the line is. But it was so funny. It was the funniest thing I ever heard in my life. And to today, to feel that it's the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life. And the line is, when they were all in the clubhouse, in the little tree house that they have, and they're talking. The leader of the Monster Squad is talking, and the quote unquote comic relief guy, he's sitting next to Fat Kid, and it was real serious. It was a serious discussion coming from the leader here. And all of a sudden, to break the levity, the little kid says, "Oh man, Fat Kid farted." And they argued back and forth like, "No, I didn't." And, because he did that. He said that because what I think his name is Sean, the leader of the Monster Squad, was so out there, talking about monsters for real. This is a real thing. We got to stop them and all this here. And he just blurts out of the blue, out of nowhere, "Oh man, Fat Kid farted." And that tore me up as a kid. I cried laughing as a kid. And watching it and repeating it right now makes my stomach hurt. It's amazing. I don't know why. They always say women mature faster than men, and I always believed that. But now I witnessed it, because I truly have not matured until this moment. I was a little kid until today, until I came to the realization that there's a difference between the way a kid thinks and the way an adult thinks. But yeah, I went through all that just to say this movie is horrible, but I loved every minute of. I actually, at the end of this movie, I was in awe on how much I despised it and loved it all at the same time. It is nostalgia cheese. It's nothing but the nostalgia that makes me appreciate it, because this is not your cult classic that you would think it would be. Because I often wondered that. I never hear people talk about the Monster Squad. Why is that? I thought this would be a cult classic. Maybe it is in some circles, but no. No, this movie is not good at all. This is the most throwaway 80s film you could ever imagine. Now, years ago, I did hear rumblings of a remake. They were going to do a remake of this movie, and believe it or not, Michael Bay was going to produce it. He wasn't going to direct it, but he was going to produce it, and it was going to be written by the Gunn brothers. And if you know who the Gunn brothers are, they are the brothers of James Gunn, and they had signed on to write screenplay and everything, but it got canceled. It was no longer in development. They couldn't crack the story. It's hard to crack it, to be honest with you, but because it's not that great of a movie. It's not much meat on that bone. So I see why they should leave it alone. But at the same time, if they're able to crack it, I hope we get a better version, an updated, good version of this film. Now, with that being said, it is hard to crack, to do it in modern times because of modern technology and stuff like that, with cell phones and all this here. It's hard. It'll be harder, but I'm pretty sure somebody will find a way. The Monster Squad, which was released in 1987, gets a letter grade of a C-, and it gets that for nostalgia. If it was released today in this version, in this form, it would be an F. But for the mere fact that it is a time capsule, and you can look back and see certain things from that era that if you're around my age or older, you you remember that, and it brings back so many good memories. It's good to watch it for that. And if you are a student of history and weren't born around that time and wanted to see how certain things were in the 80s, this is a good film to look at. It really captures the 80s in its greatest forms. but but I digress. Yes, man. Universal classic monsters, man. Those movies are those are great movies to watch because they're not long. They're not 3 hour epic films. You know, movies back then were an hour long. So you could sit back and watch a movie and just have fun with it, man. It's like you could go back to back to back. You could watch about 8 or 9 of them in one sitting, one Saturday evening or something like that. It's fun to watch. I started watching a couple of them, and I got distracted and went and did something else. But they're they hold up for the most part. If you go in with the frame of mind, these are 60, 70-year-old movies or whatnot. Fine, man. You're accepted for what it is for when it came out in that era. There isn't big budget special effects in them, but there are horror. There are some real good horror elements there that gave birth to every horror film that we watch today in some shape, form, or fashion. So I really do appreciate the Universal Classic Monsters. My favorite, before we get out of here, my favorite Universal Classic monster and monster overall is werewolves. I love werewolves. I love the Wolfman. I guess that's why I enjoyed the Wolfman earlier this year a little more than most people because I have a special place in my heart for the wolves, for werewolves. I just love it. I love American Werewolf in London and, stuff like that. I love all those movies. And so that's my favorite because of one, the transformations. That's one thing I wanted to mention about the Monster Squad. The best part about that movie was the transformation. That sticks with me. That's where most of that money went in that production was the transformation of the Wolfman in that movie. It was so good. So good. And that held up. Me watching it yesterday, it still holds up to this day. And so they really did a good job in that. But yeah, I do enjoy those Universal monster movies. So I would like to know, ladies and gentlemen, what is your favorite Universal monster? Is it Dracula? Is it Frankenstein monster? Is it Wolfman? Is it Creature from the Black Lagoon? Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, which is probably my second favorite, because that is, you don't need a potion for that. You know a lot of Dr. Jekylls and Mr. Hydes if you're not one yourself. But which one is your favorite? Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also search for the show on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Also, don't forget about YouTube. Subscribe to the KB Radio Network channel and like this video if you don't mind. Don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me for part 2 of our Halloween special. Stay tuned for part 3 coming up next week. I'm gonna surprise you with that one because I have 2. Well, we only have 2 left, but there are 2 I don't know which one is which right off because I recorded these out of order, if you can't tell. But anyways, I know the next 2 are really, really good. So whichever one it is, you're going to enjoy it. Thank you for joining me for this one. Happy Halloween. And I want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love everyone. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.